At dawn, the Colosseum was already awake. Its arches caught the pale light, while the dust of yesterday's carnage clung stubbornly to the stone. Beneath the seats, vendors barked for customers, their baskets of olives and watered wine ready for a crowd that hadn't even sat down yet. Iron gates rattled as handlers shoved half-starved beasts into place. Lions with ribs showing, elephants stamping in protest, panthers clawing at the bars. From the tunnels came the metallic clang of swords being tested, not for training, but for the day's bloodletting. And above it all, a low hum swelled. Tens of thousands of Romans streaming into their seats, eager for the one thing their empire had perfected. Death, packaged as spectacle. The Roman arena wasn't just a stage for sport. It was a laboratory of cruelty. Here, emperors proved their power by flooding the sand to reenact naval battles, by starving wild animals for the thrill of suspense, or by forcing prisoners to act out myths that ended in very real deaths. These weren't accidents of history. They were policies woven into Rome's machinery of control. To cheer in the stands was to reaffirm the empire itself. And that's why today we're diving into the most brutal and inhumane arena acts that went too far, even for Rome. From blood-drenched funeral rites to executions staged as theater. We'll uncover how a civilization built its reputation on turning suffering into applause. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to this channel. It helps us keep bringing you history's darkest and strangest stories and ensures you don't miss the next descent into the past. Now, take your seat as the gates creak open and the show begins. The first gladiatorial combat in Rome did not begin with fanfare, nor with emperors strutting in purple robes. It began at a funeral. In 264 BC, the sons of Decimus Junius Brutus Scaever decided that the best way to honor their dead father was not with statues, poetry, or prayers, but with blood. They arranged 3 pairs of slaves, armed them, and had them fight to the death in the ferorium, a cattle market that smelled of dung and smoke. This was not entertainment. It was obligation, what the Romans called munus, a duty owed to the deceased. The ritual had roots older than Rome itself. In Campa, warriors were killed at graves to appease the spirits of the dead. Over time, killing shifted into combat. The dead no longer demanded random victims, but a jewel of chosen men. The Samnites, once bitter enemies of Rome, practiced these contests regularly, and Roman elites borrowed the custom with enthusiasm. It was one thing to bury a man with wealth. It was another to bury him with a blood-soaked spectacle that reminded everyone how powerful his family had been. But funerals were only the beginning. By the 3rd century BC, Rome's leaders realized these combats could do more than honor ancestors. They could stabilize politics. Religious festivals sponsored by magistrates seeking popularity soon featured blood games. The Ludi Romani, originally solemn celebrations of Jupiter, began hosting gladiators. The Senate framed this shift as piety, but everyone in the crowd understood what it really was. State-funded entertainment designed to keep the masses loyal. The weapons and armor themselves told stories. Early gladiators were often dressed to resemble Rome's defeated enemies. The Samnite with his heavy shield and helmet. The Thracian with his curved blade. The Gaul with his long sword. To watch them fight was to relive Roman victories again and again, with each slash on the sand reminding citizens of their empire's dominance. It wasn't just death. It was propaganda, and the venues grew just as quickly as the blood spilled. At first, wooden stands were built for temporary shows. By the late Republic, these makeshift structures gave way to stone amphitheaters, permanent temples to violence where thousands could gather. The games no longer belonged to families. They belonged to the state. Each drop of blood spilled was another reminder that Rome could command not only men and armies, but even death itself. In those early days, no one in Rome could have guessed how far the games would evolve. What started as ritual sacrifice became theater, and what began as duty became obsession. Rome had discovered a new form of power, control not just over the living, but over the meaning of dying. And once that door was opened, the empire never shut it again. The roar of the crowd wasn't always for gladiators. Sometimes it was for creatures dragged from the farthest edges of the known world. Beasts that had no business being in Rome at all. Lions from North Africa, leopards from the Caucasus, crocodiles from the Nile, even giraffes brought across deserts. All paraded into arenas, not as marvels of nature, but as victims in a mass spectacle of killing. Romans called these shows venationes, hunts. They weren't about survival. They were about domination. Stage proof that the empire could capture the wild and destroy it for fun. Julius Caesar set the tone early. At his games in 46 BC, he unveiled a giraffe, the first one ever seen in Europe. Romans called it a camelopard, half camel, half leopard, because they had no idea what else to name it. The poor animal didn't survive long. It was thrown into the arena to be torn apart, not admired. For Caesar, the message was clear. If Rome could capture the strangest beasts alive, then Rome could conquer anything. The scale of slaughter was staggering. At the inauguration of the Colosseum in AD 80, Emperor Titus reportedly killed over 9,000 animals in a single festival. Some were forced to fight each other. Others were pitted against armed hunters called bestiarii. Archaeologists in Rome have found animal bones with marks of deliberate starvation. Proof that lions and bears were weakened before being released, ensuring a bloody but one-sided fight. Even elephants, creatures that had once terrified Roman legions in Hannibal's army, were dragged into the sand and butchered for applause. Logistics were part of the spectacle. Exotic animals had to be captured, transported, and kept alive long enough to appear on cue. Caravans crossed deserts with chained beasts. Fleets carried cages down the Nile, and handlers risked death to deliver their cargo. It was one thing to see a panther in the wild. It was another to see one leap out of a cage in front of 50,000 cheering Romans. Each animal was a living souvenir of empire, proof of just how far Rome's reach extended. Some emperors turned the hunts into personal vanity projects. Commodus, never shy about attention, strutted into the arena dressed as Hercules and slaughtered hundreds of animals himself. Ostensibly a god among beasts, but really just an insecure man with a bow. He even arranged staged hunts where animals were tethered or crippled, guaranteeing his heroic victory. The crowd cheered anyway, not out of admiration, but out of fear. When the emperor hunts, you clap. But beneath the applause lurked a quieter tragedy. Ancient writers like Pliny the Elder noted how rare animals began disappearing from certain regions after decades of Roman hunts. Ecological devastation was the price of entertainment. Species that once roamed freely in North Africa were pushed to extinction to satisfy Rome's bloodlust. The Colosseum wasn't just a theater of death. It was an engine of environmental destruction. For the Romans, though, extinction didn't matter. What mattered was the illusion of control. In a world where nature seemed vast and unpredictable, the arena turned it into a game. Cage it, starve it, kill it. Every beast that fell in the sand wasn't just a victim. It was another brick in the empire's wall of power. The word gladiator might conjure images of evenly matched fighters, skilled men dueling with honor in front of roaring crowds. The truth was far stranger and far more cruel. The Romans weren't satisfied with balanced combat. They engineered mismatches, invented strange weapons, and introduced bizarre rules, all to push the spectacle of blood into new creative directions. Some gladiators weren't even given a fair fight. Prisoners and condemned criminals were occasionally dressed in comic costumes, armed with wooden swords, and sent against trained professionals. The crowd laughed at their terror, jeering as one-sided battles ended in quick, humiliating deaths. What looked like sport was actually public execution disguised with the thin veneer of entertainment. Weapons became characters of their own. The retiarius, for instance, fought with a net and trident modeled after a fisherman. His opponent, Bes, carried a short sword and wore a smooth, rounded helmet designed to deflect the net. The match was less about skill than about suspense. Would the net entangle or would the sword break through? Romans loved the dramatic tension, even if the fights were more like rigged theater than fair contests. The Romans also experimented with numbers. Some games staged one gladiator against several opponents. Others featured entire squads arranged into mock armies, clashing in miniature wars for the audience's amusement. At times, hundreds of men fought in the sand at once, reducing the arena floor to a swamp of blood, broken shields, and mangled corpses. The more chaotic the scene, the greater the thrill for the crowd. There were also gladiators who broke the mold entirely. Female gladiators, gladiatrices, appeared in the 1st century AD, often used as exotic novelties. Writers like Juvenal mocked the practice, but evidence shows women fought with real weapons. Sometimes against dwarfs, sometimes against animals, sometimes against each other. Their presence blurred gender roles, but reinforced the idea that nobody, male or female, was beyond Rome's appetite for spectacle. Even the helmets could be cruel innovations. Some designs deliberately restricted vision or hearing, forcing fighters to stumble half-blind while the crowd laughed. Others were so heavy that simply lifting one's head became a battle in itself. Armor wasn't just protection. It was a handicap, another layer of theater engineered for the crowd's amusement. And then there were staged recreations of battles Rome had already won. Gladiators were dressed as barbarians, forced to fight in armor that represented conquered peoples. When they lost, which was usually inevitable, the victory was a reminder to the audience that Rome always triumphed. The fights were propaganda with sharpened edges. None of this was accidental. Every variation, the mismatches, the strange weapons, the gender-bending spectacles served the same purpose: to keep the crowds hungry, surprised, and obedient. The Colosseum wasn't content with repetition. It innovated cruelty, finding new ways to turn human lives into fresh entertainment. And for the Romans, that endless creativity and bloodshed was part of the charm. By midday, when the morning gladiatorial duels were over and the crowds were restless, the arena shifted gears. What came next wasn't combat. It was theater with death as the headline act. Romans called it Damnatio et bestias, condemnation to the beasts. For the condemned, it was less a trial than a script they had no choice but to perform. The victims came from Rome's margins. Convicted criminals, deserters, rebellious slaves, and prisoners of war. Their crimes were translated into carefully staged punishments meant to echo their supposed sins. Thieves might be torn by wolves, arsonists burned alive, traitors mauled by lions. Each execution was a morality play performed with real blood. The scale could be massive. Under Emperor Trajan, during the celebration of his conquest of Dia, thousands of prisoners were executed over a span of 123 days. The executions weren't random slaughter. They were scheduled, paced like acts in a grim play. Each death designed to hold the audience's attention until the next spectacle began. Animals were central to the performance. Lions were starved to the edge of frenzy before being released. Bears were chained in pits and prodded until they lunged. Even leopards, considered exotic luxuries, were unleashed on unarmed victims. The unpredictability of beasts made each death grotesquely suspenseful, with the lion strike quickly or toy with its prey while the audience howled. Sometimes cruelty was dressed as myth. Prisoners were forced to play characters from tragic stories. Orpheus torn apart by animals or Prometheus chained while vultures circled overhead. The blending of legend and execution turned punishment into a grotesque parody of theater. It wasn't enough for the condemned to die. They had to die symbolically, embodying Rome's myths with their bodies. The methods extended beyond animals. Crucifixion, a punishment Rome inherited from the East, was often carried out in the arena. Condemned men and women were nailed to wooden crosses, their slow agony unfolding while vendors sold wine and children played in the stands. Fire also played its part. The tuna molester, a garment soaked in pitch, was fastened to victims and set alight, creating what Tertullian later described bitterly as living torches. The executions were more than blood sport. They were propaganda. By staging punishment publicly, the state reminded everyone in attendance of its absolute authority. Resistance wasn't just futile. It was fatal, and it came with an audience. Every victim in the sand was a warning written in flesh. This is what happens to those who defy Rome. Not everyone cheered. Philosophers like Seneca criticized the brutality, claiming that the midday executions left him more cruel, more hardened than when he entered. But his words were drowned out by the roars of thousands who came not for justice, but for spectacle. In the theater of executions, Rome perfected the art of turning death into a lesson. and every scream from the arena reminded the living of who truly held power. Rome wasn't content with battles on sand. Sometimes the emperors demanded oceans in the middle of their city. The Nomia mock naval battles were spectacles on an absurd scale where water became another weapon in Rome's theater of cruelty. Unlike gladiators, these weren't duels of champions. They were massacres disguised as maritime drama. Julius Caesar staged the first Grand Naumachiae in 46 BC. He ordered a massive basin dug near the Tiber, then filled it with water and real ships. Thousands of prisoners were forced aboard, told to fight like rival fleets. These weren't actors. They were condemned men pressed into service with no hope of survival. The ships carried catapults, archers, and marines, all equipped with sharpened steel. The result wasn't theater, but an artificial war fought for no reason but applause. Augustus, Caesar's heir, expanded the madness. In 2 BC, he constructed a basin nearly 2,000 by 1,200 Roman feet, requiring a dedicated aqueduct, the Aqua Alcatina, just to keep it filled. On its waters, 30 full warships clashed, each crammed with men already sentenced to die. The sheer size of the spectacle left no doubt about the message. Rome could command seas where there were none, turning natural elements into props for political theater. Even natural landscapes weren't safe. In the year 52 AD, Emperor Claudius drained Lake Fucine and used its waters for Naumachiae. The condemned greeted him with the chilling salute that would echo through history. Morituri de salutant. Those who are about to die salute you. Whether spontaneous or rehearsed, the phrase summed up the fatalism of men forced into death as entertainment. Fire carried its own role in the arena. The tunica molester, a shirt drenched in pitch or resin, was slipped over a condemned prisoner, then set ablaze. Victims became human torches staggering in flames as the crowd roared. Sometimes these fiery deaths were dressed as myths. Hercules consumed by his poisoned shirt, or Mucus Sca proving loyalty by burning his own hand. The audience wasn't watching executions. They were watching theater written in screams and smoke. The Colosseum itself could even be flooded. Ancient sources suggest that under Titus and later Domitian, the arena floor was adapted to hold shallow pools for smaller-scale naval displays. Engineers designed systems of drains and channels that turned the sand into a watery stage, allowing miniature fleets to clash before being drained for gladiatorial combat the next day. Even in architecture, Rome engineered cruelty as if it were just another performance. What tied water and fire together was control. To summon an ocean in the city, or to turn human bodies into torches, was to prove mastery over both nature and people. The emperors weren't just rulers of men. They posed as rulers of the elements. By drowning, burning, and butchering their prisoners, they performed the ultimate illusion that Rome itself was divine, capable of commanding earth, sea, and flame. By the late 1st century AD, executions were no longer just punishments. They were scripts staged with a kind of twisted creativity that turned Rome's mythology into a manual for torture. The condemned were forced to play roles from famous legends, with the cruel punchline being that the myths ended in real bloody deaths. One of the earliest recorded examples came during the inaugural games of the Colosseum in AD 80. The poet Martial describes a performer playing Orpheus, the legendary musician who charmed wild animals with his lyre. In the myth, beasts sit in awe at his music. In the arena, things went differently. The actor strummed his instrument, but instead of being enchanted, a bear was released and mauled him in front of the crowd. Rome had twisted a tale of beauty and art into a gruesome parody. Another victim was cast as Daedalus, the mythical inventor who escaped Crete with wings of wax. In the Colosseum, the prisoner entered on a crude mechanical rig, suspended to mimic flight. The contraption failed as intended, and he was thrown to the beasts waiting below. Martial quipped about how the actor surely wished he had real feathers, proof that even Rome's poets joined in mocking the suffering. Perhaps the most disturbing was the reenactment of Pasiphae, the queen cursed to lust after a bull. In one arena spectacle, a woman, or possibly a condemned man in disguise, was forced into a contraption that simulated her union with the beast, after which she was killed, blurring lines between execution, humiliation, and pornography. The myth that once warned of human hubris became a live-action degradation for mass entertainment. Fire provided another avenue for theatrical cruelty. Victims wearing the tunica molester were cast in roles of heroes who faced fiery trials. Hercules dying in flames or Mucius Sca burning his hand to prove loyalty. The actors screamed, but the audience laughed, knowing these heroes were no more than criminals dressed in myth. The theater of suffering depended on this inversion. Gods and heroes reduced to ash and spectacle. Theatrical tortures extended Rome's obsession with control. By reenacting myths with living victims, the state didn't just kill. It rewrote stories. It took cultural symbols of strength, sacrifice, and defiance and bent them into instruments of ridicule. Every myth relived in the arena became propaganda, reinforcing the idea that Rome alone decided the meaning of legends. To the spectators, these were diversions between more serious combats. To the victims, they were agonizing deaths dressed in costumes. To Rome, they were political theater, proving that even its mythology could be weaponized against the powerless. In the Colosseum, myths weren't told through words or art. They were carved into flesh, burned into bone, and applauded until silence fell over the sand. If the arena reflected Rome's appetite for blood, then the emperors themselves turned it into a mirror of their own vanity. Some rulers used the games as political tools. Others treated them as personal playgrounds. The line between governance and obsession blurred until the emperor's whims decided who lived, who died, and how. Caligula, remembered for his erratic cruelty, once ordered spectators to be dragged into the arena when animal supplies ran low. People came expecting to watch executions. They ended up becoming them. For Caligula, the boundary between audience and victim was paper thin, and crossing it was part of the thrill. Nero, obsessed with his image as an artist, preferred the stage to the sand. But he still used the arena as a canvas for cruelty, orchestrating elaborate shows that mixed theater with punishment. Prisoners were dressed as tragic characters from plays, then killed in ways that matched their roles. Nero claimed it was art. His critics called it madness. Then there was Commodus, perhaps Rome's most infamous showman emperor. He didn't just sponsor games, he starred in them. Dressed as Hercules, he entered the arena wielding a club and bow. He slaughtered hundreds of animals, often disabled beforehand to ensure his victory. He even charged the city treasury a fee for his performances, bankrupting the state while basking in applause he had forced from a terrified audience. Commodus didn't stop at beasts. He fought gladiators too, but only under conditions guaranteeing his survival. To lose was impossible. To applaud was mandatory. Damnatio, meanwhile, turned the arena into an extension of his paranoia. He staged hunts and executions with particular relish, sometimes in the dead of night, illuminated by torches. By keeping spectacles unpredictable, he kept the population unsettled, never knowing when entertainment might turn into terror. For him, control was the ultimate performance. Even emperors who presented themselves as more restrained couldn't resist the law of spectacle. Trajan, often praised as one of Rome's good emperors, marked his Dian victories with 123 days of games. The celebrations included thousands of gladiatorial bouts and executions, a reminder that even Rome's so-called benevolent rulers measured success in spilled blood. The emperor's obsessions reveal more than personal eccentricities. The arena became a stage where rulers tested their public image. To sponsor lavish hunts was to display wealth. To kill with one's own hands was to embody divine strength. To burn prisoners as living torches was to show that power extended not just over armies, but over the very definition of human dignity. Yet obsession came at a cost. Emperors who overindulged in spectacle often lost the respect of the Senate, the treasury, or even the people themselves. Caligula and Commodus both met violent ends, remembered not for governance, but for their theatrics and blood. The arena that once elevated their power also illuminated their madness. For Rome's emperors, cruelty wasn't just policy, it was performance. And in the Colosseum, the most dangerous role was not that of the gladiator, but that of the emperor, who believed himself untouchable. Not everyone cheered when the gates opened. For some Romans, the arena was less a triumph of civilization than a symptom of its rot. Philosophers, poets, and early Christians left behind words that reveal a quieter Rome, a Rome that saw in the sand not glory, but decay. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, openly admitted the games disturbed him. After attending one midday execution, he wrote that he left more cruel, more inhuman than when he entered. To him, the arena didn't purge the soul. It corrupted it, training citizens to treat human suffering as casual amusement. His words exposed the darker effect of the spectacles. The violence didn't stay in the amphitheater. It seeped into the fabric of daily life. Cicero decades earlier had hinted at similar unease. While he praised bravery in combat, he condemned cruelty for cruelty's sake. Yet even he recognized the political necessity of sponsoring games, confessing that the masses demanded them as proof of a magistrate's generosity. His dilemma captured Rome's paradox. To be moral was to be weak. To rule was to feed the crowd's appetite for blood. Early Christians saw the arena as both persecution and proof of faith. Men and women who refused to renounce their religion were thrown to beasts or burned alive. Their deaths turned into public entertainment. Writers like Tullian condemned the games as demonic, calling them seedbeds of cruelty. For Christians, every cheer from the stands was a reminder that Rome's empire was built on the inversion of justice. The critics weren't wrong about the costs. Economically, the games drained treasuries. By the late empire, emperors bankrupted themselves to stage spectacles large enough to compete with their predecessors. What once symbolized strength became a sign of desperation, a way to buy loyalty in an empire struggling to hold itself together. Culturally, the obsession with spectacle dulled Rome's resilience. Citizens who once celebrated military discipline now demanded cheap bread and endless games. The saddest Juvenal mocked this dependency with his phrase panem sensus bread and circuses. To him, the crowd's hunger for entertainment revealed how far Rome had drifted from its republican roots. The decline of the games mirrored the decline of the empire. As resources dwindled and frontiers crumbled, the ability to stage grand spectacles faltered. Amphitheaters fell into disrepair, and the roars of lions were replaced with the silence of abandonment. By the 5th century, when barbarian invasions shattered the empire's core, the Colosseum itself stood as a hollow shell, still imposing, but stripped of its bloody voice. Yet, the moral questions never faded. Could a society that normalized cruelty truly endure? Philosophers thought not. And in hindsight, the games seemed less like a celebration of Roman power than a warning of how quickly human dignity can be traded for applause. The Colosseum remains today scarred, but standing, a monument not to Rome's glory, but to its collapse of humanity. The Colosseum still stands, its arches weathered, its seats long emptied, but the ghosts of its sand linger. When you walk through its tunnels today, you can almost hear the echoes, the clash of iron, the roar of beasts, the cheers of 50,000 voices rising as one. It is easy to admire the engineering, the grandeur, the sheer ambition of the structure. Harder, but more honest, is to remember what those stones were built for. Cruelty rehearsed and repeated until it became ordinary. Rome's arenas were never just about blood. They were about control. By turning death into entertainment, the empire trained its citizens to see suffering as spectacle, to cheer obedience, and to laugh at despair. Every execution, every animal hunt, every staged myth reinforced the idea that Rome's power was limitless. In many ways, the games weren't about the victims at all. They were about the audience, and the empire's ability to shape how that audience thought and felt. And that is the lasting lesson. The Colosseum reminds us not only of Rome's brilliance, but also of its blindness. A society that glorified violence eventually crumbled under its own weight, leaving behind ruins that tell a story both inspiring and cautionary. So, what do you think? Which of these spectacles, animal hunts, mythological torches, or imperial obsessions, reveals the darkest side of Rome's soul? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey into Rome's most brutal entertainments, don't forget to subscribe. It helps us keep uncovering history's strangest and most unsettling stories and ensures you won't miss the next descent into the past. Until then, Remember, the Colosseum may be silent, but the echoes of its cruelty still.